Well, Happy New Year and welcome to Sunday School at Second Baptist Church. I hope you had a nice time ringing in the new year. You may have eaten rice for riches and peas for peace, and other things that we do at the new year. You know, as they say, whatever you do on New Year's Day, you'll be doing that all year long. And so, you know, we hope you didn't scrub the floors or do laundry that day, or something that maybe is even harder than that. We're going to get started again in the book of Luke. We're still in chapter 2, and last week we talked a little bit. We kind of ended up talking about the wise men coming, and then the flight to Egypt, as they had been warned by an angel to go to Egypt. And then when they came back to Israel, instead of going back to Bethlehem, they went on up to Nazareth. And as we said in the past, Nazareth was a bit of a remote location and not so much under the scrutiny of the Roman rulers, which was, I think, the reason for doing that. And so we're gonna start off by reading two verses that talk about that time that I just mentioned, and that's verse in chapter 2 of Luke, verses 39 and 40. When they had performed everything according to the law of the Lord, they returned to Galilee, to their own city of Nazareth. And the child continued to grow and become strong, increasing in wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. In verse 40 there, where it says, increasing in wisdom in my version, it's not printed in your book, so I'm not sure what this version might would have said. I looked that word up, and it's just to get a better understanding. The reason that I did that is because, you know, I was thinking, did Jesus really increase in wisdom, or, you know, did he have it all from the beginning? I guess that's a debate, and we don't know exactly the answer. You know, as a babe laying in the manger, I'm sure he may not have known that he would be crucified, but who knows? I mean, we don't know the answer to that. But this word that is used here, where it says he increasing in wisdom, it can be translated to be full of wisdom, or having been full of wisdom. So, you know, it's a little different maybe translation than the way that it's printed here in my Bible. And, you know, it gives a little slightly different spin to it if you say he was full of wisdom, or being filled with wisdom, or having been filled with wisdom, you know. So you can make your own decision about how you view that part of it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. And so I was in reading this lesson and starting on this lesson, I had a thought, you know, about anyone that's ever lost or misplaced a child. And, you know, I didn't have a very good story of misplacing mine, except that I did misplace one in the grocery store one time, and how traumatic that was, even though it was just for an instant and they were on the next row. But I did remember a family story that we have where my mother was on the phone, and my little brother, who is 6 years younger than me, decided that he would go to the store, and he was about 4 years old, and got some you remember how the Coke bottles, you used to return those and get, cash them in and get more Cokes. And so he took the little 6-pack of Coke bottles, empty Coke bottles, and proceeded to walk to the store, which was, about, a quarter mile from our house, I guess, down a very busy street. And fortunately, the Georgia Power men that were working saw him go, because then my mother, when she got off from the phone, realized that he was gone and started looking for him, and they were able to tell her where he went. And I'm sure that was a moment of terror for her until she found out where he was, and the fear then of the fact that he had walked along the side of the street and no sidewalk and all of those things. How upsetting that must have been. And that only lasted maybe 30 minutes, So the story that we're going to read today, you can sort of take that and magnify it as to what Mary and Joseph might have felt when they misplaced Jesus. So let's go ahead and we'll read the first section, which is verses 41 to 44. Now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of the Passover. And when he became 12, they went up there according to the custom of the feast. And as they were returning, and after spending the full number of days, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. But his parents were unaware of it, but supposed him to be in the caravan, and went a day's journey, and they began looking for him among their relatives and acquaintances. So it says here that every year they would go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And this is a sign of their dedication to the Lord, that they did this every year. It was not a requirement that they go to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover, but God had put it in the laws and things that they should do to celebrate the Passover every year. The Passover celebration was 7 days in length, and it commemorated the time when they escaped from Egypt and how the angel of death passed over their house, because each family had put the blood of the lamb, over the door of their house, and then the angel of death passed over those houses. And this is the celebration of that miraculous time when they were able to leave Egypt and slavery. And so this is what they're going to celebrate for the 7 days. And they have their celebration, and then it's time to go home. And so they would have traveled with a group, maybe relatives and friends from Nazareth, that all came together and went together for safety, because there were robbers that would hide out, in the wilderness, and as you passed by, they would attack and steal your money or whatever. And so in a big group like that, then they would have protection. And so they traveled a day's journey and then would have made camp. And when they made camp that night and they began to look for Jesus, and he was not there, they looked among their friends and family and all the, looked among the kids that were running around probably to see if he was, with them. I would say playing soccer, but, it wasn't invented yet. But whatever kids did at that time. And so they could not find him anywhere. And so they realized that, hey, something has happened and he's disappeared. He's not come with us from Jerusalem. They didn't think they had lost him along the way, I don't think, but they realized, and it refers to him as a boy. So he's not a grown-up yet. He's 12, and 13 years old was when a young man might be considered to have entered adulthood in their society. And so 12 years old, you're still a boy. And so they've lost their boy, and not just any boy, But the boy that they know by now is the Savior of the world, or at least they know that he is super important to God, and that they had been entrusted to raise him as his parents. And so you can imagine the panic that they must have felt, because they were fully human. They were not God and man like Jesus. They were fully human, and all of those human emotions had to have come into play, and a complete panic, about where he might have been. And so let's read the next two verses, 45 and 46. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem looking for him. Then after 3 days they found him in the temple, sitting in the midst of the teachers, both listening to them and asking them questions. Now there's a few things here. So they had gone a day, so it took them a day to get back. And then it says after 3 days they found him. So we don't know if they found him on the third day. So this is day 1, day 2, and then day 3. Or if it means they came back and then they searched for 3 days before they found him. We don't know for sure the meaning of that. But when they did find him, they found him sitting among the teachers in the temple. And this is significant because normally when you would come to hear the teachers at the temple, the teacher would sit and you might stand. And for him to be sitting among them means that he had been invited, into their group to sit down with them and discuss. And it says they were, he was both listening to them and asking them questions. So he was dialoguing with the teachers. Now, if Joseph and Mary had rushed in and grabbed him up and, gone out with him, then this would not be recorded in the way that it is. But you see, they were not of a status that they could do that. I mean, to approach the teachers, those teachers, they were revered. They were like on a higher, elevation in a way. And so they would never have maybe even approached that group without trepidation to just run up there and grab Jesus, and get him back. And so they must have observed what he was doing once they finally located him. They observed that he was both listening and asking questions. And then it says in verse 47, and all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. And so the teachers, and then perhaps there were others that had gathered around and were listening to the things that he was saying and the answers he was giving, and maybe even the questions that he was asking, and realized this is a boy, not a man, but a boy, 12 years old, who has this knowledge and this wisdom to ask these things and to say these things. And so it was an unusual amount of wisdom that he had. It's because it says they were astounded or amazed in my version at his understanding. And so it was something they maybe had never seen before, a child this young that seemed to be so wise and full of wisdom, of the wisdom about God. And so then let's go on to verse 48. When they saw him, they were astonished. And his mother said to him, Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. Now, I think that is the understatement of the year, isn't it? Because anxiously looking for you doesn't even probably touch how anxious they had been looking. how anxiously. And so, when they saw him, they were astonished. They couldn't believe that he was where he was sitting with the teachers and talking and conversing like this. And then it says, Mary says to him, "Son, why have you treated us this way? Behold, your father and I have been anxiously looking for you." I like that, behold, because it sort of, puts an emphasis on the phrase. So, behold, something like maybe, it's important for you to know that your father and I have been anxiously looking for you. And so all of the human emotion of him being misplaced and then being found, is kind of included in that. And really, when you might have lost a child or misplaced a child, I'll say, your only thought is fear and anxiety and how much you love them and you want them back. But then, of course, once you find them, that may turn over to a little bit of annoyance about why they put you through what they've put you through by doing what they did, and so I feel like some of that is a part of Mary's emotions at that moment. And so Jesus says then in verses 49 and 50, he replies, "And he said to them, 'Why is it that you were looking for me? Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?' But they did not understand the statement which he had made to them." And so, if we read that with a tone, then it sounds like he smarted off at them. And I know that that's not what it was. And so, we have to try to look at it and say, okay, what did he mean? Because obviously, Jesus would not have smarted off at his parents. And so, I think it is an innocent reply. He really did not understand why would you be looking for me? You should have known. It's obvious where I would have been. And so to him, it was very obvious where they would have looked, if that makes sense. But to them, it wasn't so obvious, and I'm sure they went back to the places they had stayed and the people they had met and any relatives they might have had in Jerusalem and et cetera, and finally ended up in the temple. And maybe they went to the temple to, pray about it. I mean, who knows how they ended up there, except that they should have visited the temple, and that would have been one of the places they had been while they were in Jerusalem. And so the phrase that he says, "Did you not know that I had to be in my Father's house?" The interpretation of that is actually in my Father's affairs or in my Father's business. That is his house, in other words, his things. And so you have to feel for Mary and Joseph. They were human and they responded in a human way. But then Jesus' response seems to be an innocent, maybe a childlike response to not understanding why they would have looked elsewhere. And then it says they did not understand this statement that he made to them. So this brings out a few thoughts. When you consider at what point did Jesus mature to have the full wisdom of God, I guess you might say, because he was fully God, but he was fully man. And so we don't think of the babe in the manger, again, like I said, having the full wisdom of God. And so it seems that he grew in wisdom and understanding. Not that he, he may have had most of it already, but then somehow he did develop to a maturity, to a level of maturity, it seems. And you could debate that, and I would be okay with it both ways, because I tried to consider all of the angles of it. Was he making a response based on him already having the full knowledge, or was this an innocent response? And then it says Mary and Joseph didn't understand what he said. When he said that, didn't you understand that I must have been about my Father's business? They didn't understand that. And so that makes me feel that there was still something there that caused them not to quite fully realize who Jesus was. They had raised him as a child up to this point, 12 years now. And I'm sure many of the things he did were child things, playing and learning and growing and learning to talk and, all of those child things. And it may have been that the full impact of who Jesus was really had not hit them yet. They knew that he was extremely special, but did they know that he was the Messiah? Or was that later as they looked back and realized, okay, it all fits together now. This is what it was. And so we don't know for sure, but at any rate, they got him back. And then it says in verse 51, and he went with them and he went down with them and came to Nazareth. Again, that's a reference to the fact that Jerusalem is up and everything else is down. So he went, even though Nazareth was north, he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and he continued in subjection to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And so he was subject to them. He continued to learn from them. He went back home with them, and his mother treasured these things because she realized maybe that something else very special had happened with Jesus. That this was not the norm. This was not something that a normal child would have done, or the situation that a normal child would have been in. He was very special. And so she treasured this in her heart. And then verse 52 is the last verse that we're going to cover today. And it says, and Jesus kept increasing in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. And so in this verse, it re-emphasizes that he was increasing in wisdom. So that also kind of lends itself to the idea that he was growing in his wisdom and learning and understanding of how to interact with people in an adult way. Just, like our children do. When they're a child, they look at things in a different perspective. And then when they finally reach maturity, they understand. But when you're a child, you think as a child, as the Bible says. And so in some ways, his wisdom, even though he was fully God, his wisdom had to increase to adulthood. And then this phrase that says, if you read that through, it seems that he increased in favor with God. And so I got to thinking about that. Could Jesus have increased in favor? How could God have favored him more, or how could he have earned more favor with God than he had at the beginning when he was born as a baby? And so I did a little research on that word, and the meaning is different. Because what it really means is that he increased in wisdom and stature, and in God's grace and the grace of men, or the favor, because grace and favor, those two words are the same in the Greek. And so it means that God favored him and continued to favor him. It wasn't that he was earning favor with God, but that God's favor was upon him. I guess that's the best way to say it, as he was growing. There are verses, and this is something that we just have to resolve in our minds, because really and truly, I don't think our thought processes are complex enough to understand how God speaks to Jesus. And yet God and Jesus, are one. And how does that work? I'm not even going to begin to tell you that I can explain that, but this is an example of it. And this is an instance where we confront that thought process. It brought to mind a story that I've heard before, and you probably have heard it also, but I'm going to repeat it. It's just a made-up story, but it's a story of a farmer who was, there was a very bad blizzard coming to the farm. And he looked out and he saw a lot of, birds out in the farmyard eating and everything. And he thought to himself, these birds are going to die when the blizzard comes, because they don't even know that it's coming and they don't have a place to hide. And so he thought, I'll open up the barn and I'll get them to go inside and they'll be warm and then they can live. And so he went out and he opened up the barn and he tried to, get the birds inside the barn. And of course, they just flew away, as birds would do. And he said to himself, if only I could just be a bird and be able to talk to them, I could tell them that danger is coming and I could get them in the barn. And so this is an example maybe of the idea of God becoming man, because he had tried for a long time to have a relationship with his people. And, there were so many barriers to that relationship. And then as Jesus came as a man, he could speak to them. He could know them. He could understand and feel what it was like to be them. And so, it's kind of an analogy that helps me to understand the idea, of God coming to be man. So that's the end of our story for this week, and I think it's it kind of burns your brain cells a little bit to think so deeply about all of those things. But definitely Jesus, was growing and maturing and coming to that point of his life where he would be a man and he would have the ministry that he had among the people. And so I look forward to studying with you again next week as we talk about John the Baptist next week. Thank you for being with me, and Happy New Year once again.